is a senior management consultant with broad expertise in information systems and business operations, and has worked with international responsibility for several decades. He has an extensive experience of company law, accounting principles, and corporate governance. Mr. Sharma was twice selected as General Secretary of the NCHT UK, National Council of Hindu Temples UK. He is one of the 2 Hindu lead chaplains, NHS in police. He is the chair of City of London Interfaith. He has also been working with All Faiths Network, the British Sikh Consultative Forum. He represented Hindu community at national events like Remembrance Day. He has formulated and contributed the Hindu perspective to the government through the British Board of Hindu Scholars. He has lectured on Dharma in various institutions, including Parliament House and also on radio and TV. He is also an acknowledged yoga acharya. Mr. K. Satish.
Thank you very much. I'm bringing up the tail spot, and passions have been flying. And before I start and just share what I was going to share with you, I would issue a word of warning about passions. I know that there is a community that has been suffering for a long time. I don't think anybody has ever disputed that community has been on the receiving end of unbelievable hardship. There is not a person who I've come across since this whole issue started who has said they deserve what they get, or we're better than they are. But passions often come to the front when we're discussing this. And passions, I would suggest, although we've had some very passionate speakers, I would suggest that we try and rein our passions in. When passions run amok, we lose sight. When even a young daughter of ours is standing speaking for the first time in the House of Commons, and we descend to being able to criticise her and undermine what she's trying to say, that's what passions bring to the debate. So I would throw that in and ask you to just rein in passions a little, and let's see whether we can become a little bit closer when we finish this, a little closer than when we started this whole journey. Prejudice. Before I came, I looked up the Oxford Dictionary definition of prejudice. The holding of adverse or harmful views detrimental to an individual or group based upon malicious, misinformed or inadequate information and without a basis in fact. That's what prejudice is. And in fact, what we're talking about here, the common word is discrimination, but what we're talking about is prejudice. Prejudice is that you judge somebody before you even know them. Now, all the factors that lead towards prejudice are all to be ignored. There is nobody who will support any of those factors. But before I talk about this, I'd like everybody else just to consider for a moment what prejudices you hold right at this moment in time about me. Okay, because in the scenario that has been painted, I am the caste supremacist. I have received all sorts of hate mail that you would not believe. Nobody knows that I've been in this country for 50 years, and that when I came to this country, in a grammar school of 600 boys, Christians, there were only 4 of us who were non-white. I know what prejudice is. I spent every week either on my back with somebody on my chest fighting because I was different, or on somebody else's chest hitting them because they'd attacked me because I was different. I know what prejudice is. So let's put that to one side and just consider for a moment your own prejudices that are at play right now. This term, caste, has built into it a hierarchical prejudice. I know that we're dealing with a hierarchical prejudice which has historically devastated and discriminated against one community. But our objection is that none of the other protected characteristics have built into them an assumed prejudice. Please consider that. We are dealing with law here. Law requires definition, it requires precision, it requires consideration of all of the impacts that are going to flow from it. This is the only one of the protected characteristics which have built in an assumed hierarchy. It says that there are some people who are born higher than others. If you look at the colour of skin as a protected characteristic, there is no assumed hierarchy in anybody's consciousness that white people, right? Actually, I withdraw that. In many places, there is an assumed hierarchy that white is superior to black. Right? But the caste has built into it something which is inherently prejudicial. Please consider that. Now, we've heard lots of statistics thrown out. We've also heard lots of, I would say, uninformed statements made about the historicity of caste. And it's a shame that Bobby is not here today. But right at the beginning, Manji, you said that where did this Dalit, where did this community come from? This caste word that's associated with it. Where did it actually emerge? Well, I took that, 3 years ago when this was thrust upon us, I took that to heart and thought, I want to know this as well. Where did this community come from? Because historically speaking, and religiously speaking, spiritually speaking, if you look at the Shastras, we've had people quoting Nanaki and so on, Adishankaracharya, he said the same thing, Name Jati Veda. And that's crystal clear that there is no distinction between Jati is what he was saying. Caste as a concept does not feature in any scripture. And although we have had people say it does, I defy you to find it, it does not. We have Varna, and Varna is different. We can talk about Varna, but in the limited amount of time that I have, I didn't want to introduce that. I wanted to introduce a couple of other ideas. When this was brought across my desk, and I looked at it, I was horrified. And I too, the first thing I did is I went to a group of youngsters, 18 of them in my local school, who were all of brown, South Asian descent, and I asked them about caste. I said, does this feature in your existence? And they said, haven't you old people got anything better to do? Right, this is exactly the words that the young lady said to me at that time. And she said, what on earth are you doing? And it struck me that in 3 generations of our people being in this country, we have actually managed to reverse and almost eradicate the conditioning that prevailed in India when our first and second generation came to this country. This whole subject I have seen destroy 3 relationships amongst younger people because they started to ask their parents about who was caste. It changed the dynamic of the relationship amongst them. That is a very real impact of introducing this. I know there are battles to be fought in other countries, and from where we stand, we're very happy to stand with those who are fighting the battles, which say meritocracy is the only basis upon which a person should be recognized. Your work, your efforts, and your achievements, they broadcast what you should be receiving from the wider community. And that applies to people who are notionally labelled higher caste and notionally labelled lower caste. Meritocracy is the only way forward from where I stand. We've had claims made about NISA's reports, and there's enough evidence. The MD of NISA himself rejected the report as being completely unsuitable for legislation. So, we can go into those as well. But what I wanted to do was to introduce 1 or 2 new threads into this. I wanted to know, where did this Dalit community come from? Because there are many records of visitors to India, of historians in India, and very rarely do you come across the notion that there was a community who existed on the periphery of most towns, who were ostracized, who were denigrated, who were diminished and reduced to such a state that they had no option but to scrape a living at a subsistence and animal level. They had no options other than, and this is not just in one small part of India, this is throughout India, this community, where did they come from? So I did a little bit of research. I say a little bit, I spent the last 2 years to find out when this happened. And it's very fitting that we're here in the House of Parliament. Because what I'd like to, as NCHT, we're publishing a report in 2 weeks' time. And I'm going to take 1 or 2 small extracts of that report. And our report has been researched quite a high degree. A couple of things I leave with you. A gentleman called N.L. Middleton, he surfaced in my studies. In 1911, he was the superintendent of the government of India, and he was the one principally responsible for the census of 1911. And he wrote, "We pigeonholed everyone by caste, and if we could not find a true caste for them, labelled them with the name of hereditary occupation. We deplore the caste system and its effect on social and economic problems, but we are largely responsible for the system we deplore." Wendy Doniger, who's not really a friend of Hindus, if anybody has read her work or studied the slightly psychologically disturbed perspective she has on many things, she wrote in her book, she noted that notions of caste, which in India had traditionally been relatively fluid and secondary, became rigid when the sepoys of the British Army were made to understand caste as being central to their notions of self-identity and respect. Subsequently, the idea that caste is the basis of the Indian social order and that to be a Hindu is to be a member of a caste became a dominant colonial axiom. Wendy Gardner in 2009 in the book, The Hindus. James Fitzjames Stephen, a parliamentarian speaking in 1871 in the House of Parliament, presented the perspective of the colonial administration at that time. He said, people from time immemorial have been pursuing the caste system to find job positions, weaving, carpentry, etc. were hereditary jobs. So there must have been hereditary criminals who also pursued their father's profession. So a parliamentarian is putting forward the notion that it's possible for Hindus to be criminal by birth. When we speak of professional criminals, we mean a tribe whose ancestors were criminals from time immemorial, who are themselves destined by the usage of caste to commit crime, and whose descendants will be offenders against the law until the whole tribe is exterminated. That was said here. In 1871, the British Parliament passed...
Excuse me, is there a time for question answers? Excuse me, the point of order. Is there any time for question answers?
Yes. Please let him finish, please don't talk.
No, I am only asking. 9 o'clock.
He will be there.
Okay.
In 1871, an act was introduced and passed in Parliament called the Criminal Tribes Act. As a result, anyone born in certain communities across the country was presumed a born criminal, irrespective of their criminal precedents. This gave the British colonial police sweeping powers to arrest them, control them, monitor their movements. Once a tribe was officially notified, its members had no recourse to repeal such notices under the judicial system. From then on, their movements were monitored through a system of compulsory registration and passes. Whenever they tried to make a living like everybody else, they did not find work outside of the settlements because of public prejudice and ostracization, and this has continued to this day. In one act of legislation alone, 273 tribes in Bengal were immediately designated as criminal by birth. They were not allowed to move except in the periphery of villages and towns, and these criminal tribes by birth were in fact very proud people. They were, if I give you an example, in pre-colonial India, we had tribes who would be responsible for movement of goods from town A to town B. They were entrusted, they were accepted, they were given the responsibility of taking those goods, and they protected those caravans. They had a very, very high regard. When the British introduced taxes on movement of goods, these tribes were automatically designated as criminal tribes and confined, corralled into settlements around India. And you may think this is such a long time ago. In 1947, when the British left, there were 13 million individuals who were actually controlled and located in villages under the Criminal Tribes Act. Criminal by birth. This is where the crushed community, after 80 years of having been forced to live on the periphery of society, being able to do nothing except the lowest menial tasks, this is where the Dalits came from. And it's, when I think of what they went through, I completely understand the rage and the hatred. I would ask anybody who is really genuinely interested in understanding how this atrocity was perpetrated, I would ask them to go back to the history books, research this, find out who was genuinely responsible for it, and you will find that the people who inflicted this on the criminal tribes born by birth were actually the same people who were at that time bleeding India dry and inflicting the divide and rule policy which became actually associated with the British rule of India. Now I'm going to submit these facts to you. You can look them up, right, and come to your own conclusions. I am not presenting any solutions to this, but I'm saying that if you really want to address this at its roots, There are people who you, at this moment in time, may feel are against you, but I would suggest you go back to the drawing board and understand you will find a huge amount of support to right this wrong that was done amongst the very people who you've been encouraged to target. At this moment in time, that's all I'd like to release about the report. But if there is anybody who would like to have a copy of the report when we do publish it, or who would like to participate in its launch, the website is www.nchtuk.org, and if you send an email to info at that address, then we will add you to the list and make sure that you're informed and you can also participate. In conclusion, I would say that, I'll just remind everybody, this legislation impacts on us here in this country. There are wrongs being perpetrated throughout the world, and I would warn against bringing those wrongs and using them to potentially correct a wrong which does not exist to the degree that it does elsewhere. That would be a recipe for disaster, it would be a recipe for friction amongst our own community. And just in final conclusion, there are children who are born right now who have got names with which you will identify them as being outcast. They know nothing about where they came from. They know absolutely nothing about all the troubles our past generations have had. Let's not burden them with these. Let's allow them and support them to work together, to live together, and build a better Hindu community.